Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of LA Legal. I'm Leanna. Joining me is Nima. And for the first time in the 2.5 seasons that we've already filmed, we have an attorney joining us all the way from Philly. So, welcome. Thank you for flying out here and tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. I had to come out to LA. Had any excuse to come, and it's good to be here. My name's Tom Bosworth, and I'm at Bosworth Law in Philadelphia.
I got to brag a little for Tom. He's one of the biggest MedMal lawyers in the state of Pennsylvania. Hopefully you never need him. Hopefully you never need any of us. But if you do, I mean, he's the guy to go to. And obviously, Pennsylvania very MedMal friendly. Obviously not a MedMal case, but let's talk about our case.
Let's talk about Alec Baldwin. I don't know which one of you chose this topic, but I think it's a good one.
I did. Yeah.
You did. Okay. So, just a quick intro. The film Rust is directed by Joel Souza and stars Alec Baldwin as one of its biggest actors. The film was intended as a Western, but quickly turned into a horrific crime scene when a bullet was accidentally fired at the director of photography, Helena Hutchins. The bullet then exited her body and hit director Joel Souza in the shoulder. Although Souza was released from the hospital a day later, Hutchins was declared dead after being airlifted to a nearby hospital. Rust, as I mentioned, was intended to be a Western film, which follows a 13-year-old boy on the run with his grandpa after the boy is sentenced to hang for an accidental killing. So the irony here is pretty chilling.
Obviously, a very unique case. You got your criminal aspect, your civil, the entertainment value. You have a celebrity. It's all coming together. I think safely we can say, Tom, that the case is over. I don't think the DA is going to refile. Obviously, we have the case against the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. That's still ongoing. But what are your thoughts, just kind of high level, about this case?
Yeah, I mean it's wild. I think. The one thing that I just can't wrap my head around is how. I mean, I think I speak for everyone. How a bullet ended up on the set. Like, I don't think anybody's actually answered that question.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, Nima, the case against the ammunition company. I didn't even know about that until recently, but I think that's really interesting. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
over yet or not.
Well, I
but-
think there's just a crazy amount of negligence and recklessness happening on set regardless, right? And so the day of the filming, a lot of the crew members have told investigators that during the lunch break, some of the crew was was shooting using a prop gun, but they were shooting at tin cans. And so that is, there's one theory is that some of those bullets must have been real to shoot at the tin cans. And then during lunch, they were, I don't know if they were not placed in the safe or they should have been or whatever, but nobody checked. And so the fact that people are shooting using prop guns is already to me a big red flag, right? I mean, I would imagine that you take the guns away, you store them, and then everybody comes back, you do another run through and make sure that everything is as it should have been. But instead, these guns are being shot and used during lunch for fun. So I think that's really where this kind of just goes south really quickly. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking at the civil case and liability, obviously you're going to talk about the individuals, right? You have the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, right? She's responsible. Her sole job is to maintain these weapons. That's why she's brought. I think it's her second gig or movie gig. Then you have Dave Halls. He's the assistant director. He's the one who famously gets the gun. He gives it to Baldwin and says it's a cold gun, right? Obviously, Baldwin then, he says he doesn't pull the trigger. The FBI report says otherwise, that he did pull the trigger. But regardless, he points the gun at Helena Hutchins. Question, we should ever do that, even if you think it's a cold gun and has blanks. He says he puts he cocks the hammer back. Again, don't know if you should be doing that either. But yeah, going back to what you're saying, there's reportedly live rounds on set. People are saying that Gutierrez-Reed was like high the night before and drinking.
Apparently, I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently there's some drug use. I don't know if it's true or not, but what the allegations are. So there's a sort of the individual liability, but obviously there's Baldwin, the actor that pulled the gun, but there's Baldwin, the producer, as the employer, who is potentially liable for the negligence of his employees. And I think there's maybe some sort of indemnification provision. But, Baldwin is getting hit in both directions, as the individual, as the employer, and of course as the deep pocket, right?
Well, let me ask you guys this question. Baldwin as the actor, as the individual, not the employer. I mean, he's a big actor, right? He's been on plenty of movie sets. Do you guys think he should have checked? He should have known enough? Or, is it really even the actor's job to double check if or what kind of ammunition is in his gun, right? I mean, he's handed, think about it. You're an actor, you're on set, you have, they have like body doubles who do the blocking for them. You come to your call time, they hand you a gun, they say it's cold. I mean, are you just going to take it and run with it, or do you think you double check?
So I've thought about this, and it's hard to make a case against him, in my opinion, because I don't know how much responsibility he has to, like, why would he assume there was ever a live round?
Yeah.
At the same time, I watched his TV interview, and I was questioning whether he should have done that at all. And he, no pun intended, I think shot himself in the foot a little bit because he got up there and said, I didn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And then the FBI report said, this gun doesn't fire unless you pulled the trigger. And, I, with all due respect to how difficult it must have been for him and mostly the victim, obviously, I still don't understand going on TV and making those statements as boldly as he did that were then refuted. So I don't know.
Also, what I think was problematic is whoever was doing his stage blocking pulled that same gun out 3 times and nothing happened, right? So that shows that, okay, maybe you did in fact pull the trigger because this same gun has now been in like rehearsal multiple times and nothing has happened. It's never accidentally fired.
Well, there was a report that one of the guns on set had misfired a couple days before. I don't know if it's the same gun, but there was that report. And yeah, talking about that interview with Stephanopoulos, that ABC interview, I know Baldwin's criminal lawyer, one of them at least, and I'm guessing that he said, don't do that interview. I don't think any lawyer would advise their client to do the interview, but I think this is where sort of law and the PR side of things diverge. This is Baldwin, the actor. He's thinking about the rest of his career. I mean, he's big on SNL. And of course, there's this whole sort of political component as well. There's a lot of conservatives that don't like him. He portrays Donald Trump. He's been really sort of anti-gun. And of course, the irony, he ends up killing someone with a gun.
Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, let's just pinpoint him as the actor, right? I mean, we heard your thoughts, but what do you think in terms of like liability, in terms of how hard the DA came for him and then ultimately dropped the charges? What do you think?
As a former prosecutor, I mean, I want to separate the criminal case. I think it's very different. From the civil perspective, it's a much stronger case. Obviously, we know it's civil law, preponderance of the evidence, much lower standards, simple negligence, right? Manslaughter, you have gross, you have criminal negligence. I think it was a strong case. Now, obviously, Helena Hutchins passes away. Her next of kin is Matt Hutchins, her husband, who happens to be a lawyer at Latham and Watkins, and transactional, not a litigator. He hires Panish's firm, who we know as well, one of the best firms, and obviously very strong negligence case, and certainly not one that Baldwin is going to push to trial. I mean, that's a case that you need to settle, and they settled very quickly, actually.
Yeah.
They, I don't, I would always want to know how much they settled for, but we're not going to know.
No, I don't think we're going to know.
I think the most interesting part of the civil settlement, though, before we go to the criminal case, which is fascinating in and of itself, is as part of the civil settlement, Matt Hutchins, the husband, gets equity in the movie Rust, right?
Yeah.
He becomes a producer and he gets a piece of the film. So, a lot of people said, well, what's the purpose? Was this to sort of co-opt him? What sort of carrot was this? He's obviously someone that had never been in production before, but he ended up getting a piece of the film, which probably gave him an incentive to finish the film and not necessarily push the criminal case as aggressively as possible. So once they settled the case, the husband came out and said this was all an accident, right?
Yeah.
And I think that really undercut the DA's case that was saying this is more than an accident. This is criminal negligence and manslaughter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think it's hard to sort of when you take a look at everything, right, to say, well, at least on Baldwin's part, this was not an accident, right? Everyone else, like you mentioned, like Gutierrez, where her sole job is to make sure that gun safety and protocol is being followed. People like that. Then I feel like you can make a stronger case. You can make a stronger argument. With Baldwin, I think it's a little like gray. But before we move on, I want to touch on his celebrity, right? Because a lot of people were like, well, if this was not Alec Baldwin, he would have gotten, maybe like his charges wouldn't have been dropped, or he would have gotten more severe charges. What do you guys think? Do you think his celebrity played into either the criminal or the civil?
I don't know. I kind of tend to think the opposite. Like, I kind of thought
Mm-hmm.
you're in a small. I've never been in this part of New Mexico. I've never been to New Mexico at all, but I want to
Me neither.
I want to check it out. But I was like, I remember thinking about it at the time. Like, you have this small town, I think, prosecutor, and I know you were a federal prosecutor, but I'm like, maybe these are the people that want to stick it to a guy like this,
Yeah.
who's Mr. Famous, Mr. LA. I kind of, my gut reaction was they're gonna come hard at him. So I was that was my gut reaction, but I'm not shocked that they haven't pressed the criminal charges, given the beyond a reasonable doubt standard, and given at least what we know to be some confusion and lack of intent, lack of knowledge on his end.
Yeah.
So, but I defer to the
So
prosecutor on
there's
that.
Yeah.
there's actually a pretty famous I didn't get his name, but defense attorney in New Mexico who actually put out a statement saying Baldwin's dismissal is looking like the people left holding the bag have all the responsibility. They're the lowest in the chain, and he's off the hook. So
Well, I gotta say, I generally agree with Tom. People think that celebrities get a free pass in our criminal justice system. I think, at least in this particular case, it's the opposite. I don't think Baldwin would have been prosecuted for what he was had he not been for Alec Baldwin and someone didn't want to make a name for herself. Let's just kind of go through the individuals, right? I think, again, Hannah Gutierrez Reed is the most responsible. We know what her job is. We've talked about it. But then you have Dave Halls, right? He's assistant director. He says the gun doesn't have live rounds. It's cold. It clearly does. He didn't check it, obviously. Or if he checked it, he was completely incompetent. So he's playing Russian roulette with people's lives. So the problem I had with the case from the jump is the prosecutor in the case gives Dave Halls a no-time misdemeanor deal. Slap on the wrist. And then she charges Alec Baldwin not just manslaughter, but she charges a firearms enhancement that has a 5-year mandatory minimum. That means if Baldwin's convicted, he has to serve at least 5 years in New Mexico State Prison. I too have not been to New Mexico. One of our lawyers, Tony, is from New Mexico. Maybe we can ask her, but I don't think Baldwin would have done well in New Mexico State Prison for 5 years.
Probably not.
So it's
Yeah.
like, look, you're charging Baldwin with a 5-year mandatory minimum. You're charging the other guy with giving him nothing. How is that fair? How is that
Yeah.
just in terms of the culpability and responsibility in the case?
yeah, well, I think this is a good segue. I think you're the best person to explain to our viewers what a weapons enhancement charge is, and then let's also talk about involuntary manslaughter. So, and then we can sort of break it down from there.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to law school. So
Yes.
I don't give anyone.
We love going back to law school.
Yeah. They were told there would be no bar exam questions, but no. So simple negligence, right? What does a reasonable person do, right? We all kind of know what that is in our current practice, right, as plaintiffs' lawyers. But manslaughter requires something more. It requires criminal negligence, gross negligence, And the question was this gross negligence, number one? The typical manslaughter case is, you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol and you get behind the wheel and you kill someone, right? If you kill someone because you're sober and you blow a stop sign or a red light, you're not going to be charged with vehicular manslaughter. Generally speaking, it requires that criminal negligence. Now, there are some states that have simple negligence, but that's my lawyer disclaimer for you guys watching. But most of the time, manslaughter requires something more than simple negligence. And I just don't think it was there. Then you have different enhancements under the law. So let's say like you kill someone and there's a weapon involved, or you're part of a gang, or you kill more than, So the law will sometimes have these enhancements on top of the crime. And in this particular case, New Mexico had an enhancement that if you're involved in a death, an unlawful death, and a firearm is involved, there's a 5-year mandatory minimum on top of it. So if it weren't for that, the actual manslaughter charge itself has an 18-month max under New Mexico law.
Really?
It's like a Class D felony. So 18-month max, which might be right if you think that, he was criminally negligent. But then you throw 5 years on top of it. How does that make any sense? How is that
Right.
just? It just wasn't meant for that purpose.
Right. Right. And again, I think just looking at the facts, right, we don't really have any evidence, at least from what we know, right? None of us were there, but that he's doing anything reckless. I mean, is he like throwing this gun around or like, in the movies when they kind of like
Yeah.
spin it? He's not really doing any of that. He's literally blocking where the shot is going to be filmed. So I don't know. I think this was a really tough criminal case against him,
You know
given what we know.
was interesting was when I read the complaint of, is it Gutierrez?
Yeah.
So she had all these text messages between herself and somebody else on set. Or no, the ammo guy, Seth, some guy.
Yeah.
And they were very combative texts about
Yeah.
like someone being thrown under the bus
Mm-hmm.
and her complaint was really interesting because it kind of led up to the event, the shooting, by saying like, well, kind of like, well, this is what happened when I wasn't there and I wouldn't have done this and he had the gun and he shouldn't have. But then it kind of like had me thinking, well, like, but if the gun doesn't have a real bullet in it, why do we care?
Right.
Like, about all this lead up, there's all these safety precautions in place, which obviously should be. But again, maybe I'm just ignorant to I mean, I am ignorant to like the film
Yeah.
process,
No,
but it's
I
like,
mean, I just think like, look, you can get seriously hurt with a BB gun. I don't know if you guys have ever been shot by a BB gun, but those
I'm
things,
not.
I have, and they hurt.
Me and
Okay.
my brother had
Yeah.
BB gun
Yes.
wars, which is
I-
probably
Well,
illegal.
you guys are brothers.
I have a
sister,
brother.
so
I have a
now
brother.
we-
Trust me, I've been shot by a BB gun. They hurt. So you know what I mean? Like, with that said, the reason I bring that up is because even with a prop gun, right, there's still loaded. So I did a bunch of research because this is fascinating to me. And movie magic is just fascinating regardless, right? So most guns will be filled with like fake bullets, right? There's nothing in them that's going to hurt. But if you're at a close enough proximity to make it more authentic, when you fire, you can still get hurt. So there are all sorts of like union protocols and rules that should be followed, none of which were followed here. Going back to shooting with the tin cans and Noah. So, I just think that this was just a gross violation of any and all protocol of filmmaking.
Yeah, one of the things that Gutierrez said too was that in the 2 hours leading up to the shooting, she was asking Alec Baldwin, like in between set, like, "Hey, can I get the gun back?" And he was like, "No, no, no." Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it made me like imagine Baldwin in this like in character,
Yeah.
like walking around with the gun, like,
Yeah.
"This is my gun, I'm getting
Yeah.
into it." But then apparently he was told by Helena to point the gun at her
At her,
armpit
right.
Yeah.
or something, I think.
Because I think they were trying to film a close up, right? So the schedule was after lunch they were filming something in a different location, and they were in this church because she wanted to get a close up of him doing
This
whatever.
is like this cross draw,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so I don't know. I just think between the director and the cinematography and even if, she had asked him for the gun back, I think that creates even more liability. Right now you're passing around this gun. Like, is she going to check it? Do they have to go through and recheck? I don't know. I just think that there's way too many moving parts considering that everyone on set has been made aware that there's live rounds somewhere floating around on set.
Yeah, there's the live rounds, and I think one of the other theories of liability, I mean, we talked with the DA, said he had an independent duty to check the gun. But if not, the argument would be, even if Baldwin believed that it was not a live round, it is a blank. You're not supposed to point the
Yeah.
gun at another. You can still hurt someone with a blank.
Right.
Now, of course, Hutchins asked for it to be pointed at her, so question of whether there's any comparative negligence on her. But I think it was very good lawyering on the plaintiff's side. I don't know if you saw the animations. I think they were fantastic.
Those were really good, yeah.
Amazing job. Not because we know them, not because they're here in LA, but I thought it was very good lawyering. I also want to kind of give some credit, even though I'm a former prosecutor, to the lawyering on the defense side. Obviously, Baldwin has a lot of money. He hired some great lawyers. And I think they did two things very well that maybe flew a little bit under the radar, but for me, as a former prosecutor, I'm like, wow, I kind of tip my hat to them. That 5-year firearms enhancement, talk about a botch. That enhancement was passed by the New Mexico state legislature after Helena Hutchins was killed. They charge it anyway, but going back to con law, that's a violation of the ex post facto clause of the Constitution. You cannot
And you
charge
thought
a
you were coming
criminal.
to a podcast?
I didn't even remember that existed. Thank you.
We just took the bar. He just took the Arizona bar.
Yeah. So PTSD, but yeah, you're like, how does that sound familiar? Criminal laws can't be retroactive, so they charge this retroactively. The defense lawyers catch it and do it well. They file a motion and it gets dismissed. So that was kind of one
Smart.
win.
Yeah.
The other thing was, look, the DA's office, they were outmanned. They asked for additional funding for like PR people, for other lawyers, and they try to get some special prosecutors to prosecute the case. But those prosecutors, at least one of them, was a member of the New Mexico State Legislature. And they argued, and let's go back to your column, that look, it's a separation of powers issue. You can't have someone in the legislature doing an executive function, which is prosecution. So they get these special prosecutors disqualified as well. So it was really one loss after another, real black eye for the DA's office, who, by the way, waited over a year to announce charges, well after the civil case had settled. Charges saying it's unconstitutional, brings on prosecutors that were unconstitutional. They're losing left and right. They kind of are forced to dismiss the case. They say it's without prejudice. Of course, we know jeopardy hasn't attached yet. But I don't think they're going to refile. And I think it was a pretty significant loss for the prosecution here.
I don't think they're going to refile. I mean, in their statement, formal statement, they said, pending additional evidence and whatnot. But like, what else is going to come to light now, especially after all this time, that's going to, be able to give us grounds to go after Baldwin again. But I think what you mentioned kind of goes to the celebrity aspect, right? Because that's what I think really gives these celebrities the edge, right? Not that they're household names, but it's they have the money for some of the best lawyers, right? And so in situations like this, where you have maybe an incompetent, underfunded, understaffed, whatever district attorney's office, he's got the leg up because he's got all the money in the world, and he can hire whoever he wants.
I couldn't help. I'm sorry, I'm going back to the TV interview. But when I watched it, I was like,
how did you really feel about it?
I was like, I would love to cross-examine Alec Baldwin. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to pick on him, but I think that actors are kind of like lawyers as witnesses, in the sense that they might think they're better than they are.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, they're paid to act, but like if you're a good lawyer and you're an effective lawyer and you can pick up on what's authentic and what's not, it's just an interesting dynamic. I just an actor on the stand. I've binged some of the Depp be heard things.
Yeah. Well, Depp obviously an actor, one of the best actors and one of the best witnesses I've ever seen.
Yeah,
Amber Heard. Sure. Probably not as good of an actress and pretty terrible.
But Alec Baldwin is great, and so when you watch that interview and he cries right at the right time for just the right amount of, time during the interviews, I do find myself sometimes thinking, like, is this really authentic, or are you just a phenomenal actor and you can cry on cue? I guess we'll never know. He was good with
Detective, and he was good with ABC. So he gave 2 interviews, both I thought very well made. One thing I wanted to mention is, and I know we talked about earlier, all of us, how maybe he got charged because he was Alec Baldwin. And I think prosecutors might go after actors and famous people a little bit more aggressively, maybe to make a name for themselves. Yeah. But I think juries love actors. So, I mean, prosecutors might like to prosecute them, but juries like to acquit them. Yeah. And that's something that, let's be honest, we live here in LA, and actors.
No, they know how to compose. I mean, this, during the, very unrelated, but during the Murdoch trial too, and when I was watching all the footage of his interviews and stuff, I'm like, this guy's been an attorney for like 100 years. Like, he knows what to say. I mean, granted, maybe don't touch the bodies, but like, he knew what to say, when to cry, how to act like a witness. I mean, so sometimes I feel like it could either bite you in the butt or you could just pull it off.
I remember watching, I know this isn't about Depp, but I remember watching him and I'm like, what other person could get away with like wearing like sunglasses in a courtroom? And like you could tell the jury was eating it up, and he was driving away from the courthouse in like a pickup truck, but he
was great. Yeah. He was so entertaining to watch.
Yeah. But one thing I want to say is, I looked at the line of people who were waiting from sometimes midnight the night before to get into that gallery. And of course, I saw the press and some of the folks that I know and that are covering the case. But I would dare say it was 80 to 90% women,
Yeah.
I mean, he had a lot of fans in there. Not to say
I
I'm not a
don't
fan,
know
but
who goes in with charges like that, with people like genuinely hating him, and then as the trial progresses, he just gets more and more and more love. I mean, it was just crazy. It really was the trial of the century. But have we done a Johnny Depp podcast? Maybe we should just do a part two.
No, we
This
should.
is turning into
As
one.
it's turning into one. But anyway, any final thoughts on our friend Alec Baldwin?
I'm sure he's very pleased with how things turned out. I think, like you said, he had great lawyers making really sophisticated arguments, and I'm sure that he didn't mind paying some monetary sum, and I'm sure he feels terrible about what happened.
I
So I just hope the family can rebound as much as you possibly can rebound after something like this.
I agree. I mean, we cover a lot of cases here. I think sometimes the result isn't the just result, but I really think this was here. I mean, this was clearly a civil liability case. Baldwin had to pay, or his insurance, or both. I think from a PR perspective, he did a good job. He killed someone. He owned up to it. He apologized. He spent time with the family, as opposed to just denying any responsibility.
Yeah.
So he handled it well from both a legal and PR perspective. And I think, as we talked about in the criminal case, this was not a case that Alec Baldwin deserved to go to jail. And to try to do that for an accident, that's just not what our law is meant to do. So I think it was the right and just result all around.
I agree with you guys. I think you could tell that he was genuinely upset about what happened. I think that, he also, I mean, I can't imagine living with something like that, right? Of course, the family of Helena Hutchins, my heart goes out to them. But, there was, I think, a lot of people who also, their lives changed that day. He's one of them. And so I agree that civil liability was the way to go. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for
I
having
hope
me.
this was worth the flight
This
to
was awesome.
LA.
This is so much fun. Yeah.
And before we let Tom go, Bosworth Law. I mean, obviously,
Yes.
big law influencer, lawfluencer. I guess it is.
Lawfluencer. Oh,
Yeah,
that's a
what-
good one.
yeah.
Hashtag lawfluencer, no
Where can people find you on social media?
So Tommy the Lawyer is my TikTok handle, and Lawyer Tom Bosworth is my Instagram. So
Okay.
I'm lacking in my Instagram, so I'm hoping to bounce that.
Oh,
Well,
got
why
it.
don't we do some Instagram reels before you go? No, you got some time for that? All right,
Sure.
let's do it.
There we
Cool.
go.
All right. Oh my gosh.
Well, there you go. So you didn't just fly out for a podcast. Thank you all for joining, and we will see you guys next time with a new topic.
Thanks, everyone.